What shapes our view of global warming, whether we believe in it or not? Is it all a matter of our own personal biases and psychological makeup? Well, let's take a look at that. How do our personal biases affect what we see? The way that we perceive the world around us depends on many different factors. The keenness of our own senses, our own life experiences and personal beliefs, our thought processes, the environment in which we're making these observations. For example, if you're very relaxed and not paying attention, your ability to make accurate observations is very much compromised. If you're really stressed and burned out, then you can't generally make very good observations. The best chance you have of understanding what's going on is somewhere between those two extremes. These situations differ from person to person and depend on the situation that person is in to make those observations. Here is the annual global temperature anomaly for the last 135 years. What do you see? Looking at these same data, some see a decline from 1998 onwards. Others see no change from 1998 onwards. Some see an overall disastrous rise. Some see a steady, slow rise superimposed upon the natural ups and downs of climate variability. I, by the way, am in that latter category. So how do we avoid these biases? Well, we can let math do the job. There are certain statistical analysis techniques that allow you to determine independently what the trend is in the data. Here I've used a simple linear least squares fit to find out what the trend is overall in the data from 1910 to 2015. And the overall trend there is an increase in temperature of about 0.1 degrees centigrade per decade. Does that eliminate all the biases? No, it doesn't, because you can change the start and stop point to get different results. I didn't need to necessarily use a linear algorithm. I could have used a exponential or a logarithmic algorithm to do this, and I would get a different shaped curve. And then there's the statistical weight you put on each point. One of these points has an uncertainty associated with them, and that should be included in the calculation, and in this case it was not. If you look through the data and take short time steps, you can find a decline all the way through this general increase. Similarly, you could take arbitrary points and just draw a straight line across the graph to a similar point sometime in the future and say there's been no change in temperature over that time period. All of these techniques are therefore flawed. Is there another way of doing this? How can we remove these biases? Well, one way would be by choosing a large independent group of experts in statistical analysis and let them analyze the data themselves and see what conclusions they come to. However, those experts themselves may have biases about global warming. So how do we get rid of that? Well, by not telling them what the data is. In fact, by telling them it is something entirely different. That would remove the biases that they have about global warming. They then analyze the data themselves and come to certain conclusions. And we can compare those conclusions with the groups of both pro and con global warming. We can ask these independent experts whether the conclusions drawn by each side are supported by the data or not supported by the data, and is the data sufficiently good to base policy on. This is exactly what was done by the University of Bristol. They gathered climate data for temperatures, sea ice, extent, etc. over a number of years. They then rebranded them as annual financial statements for various corporations and various demographic changes. They then disguised the conclusions from both of the skeptics and the mainstream climatologists, then asked the experts which of these were supported by the data and which were not. Let's take an example of what they did. We'll take an example of a change in glaciation. The original statement made by many of the anti-global warming folks is that glaciers are growing, not retreating. And almost all of our glaciers are growing. Here is a sample of data from glaciers that have been monitored very closely for a number of years. This was rebranded to say that these data were a change in the rural population of a particular country. So the statements were now changed to our country's rural population is growing, not shrinking, and almost all rural villages are gaining in population. The experts were then asked of these data, do the data confirm these claims? Are the claims misleading? Do the data contradict the claims? Are the data sufficiently good to be able to base policy on? Well, How did the experiment turn out? They used two independent groups of experts. The results from both groups were the same. They considered 6 different scenarios for the experts to analyse. The climate skeptic statements were judged to be misleading, inaccurate, and unsuitable for basing policy by all of the groups. The climate experts' statements were judged to be accurate and suitable for basing policy. They have conducted this experiment on a number of different subjects over the years and never found such a large diversity between the two camps, with one camp being almost completely right most of the time and the other camp being almost always being wrong. Well, let's see how you do. I'm going to give you a number of statements and see what you think the trend in the data is. In this case, do you see a decrease in the real US middle class income in percentage terms over the last 30 years? In this case, do you see an increase in the value of US businesses in trillions of dollars over the last 130 years, proving that capitalism works? Do you see an increase in sexually transmitted diseases over the last 60 years? In this case, do you see a decrease in traffic fatalities due to the imposition of greater and greater safety measures? In this case, do you see a correlation between the murders by hot objects and the age of Miss America? So let's see how you did. If you answered yes to all of those, you are unbiased and now believe in global warming. Unless, of course, you cheated. Let's go over those individual things and see what actually they were about. So was this a decrease in middle class income? No. It was a change in the thickness of Arctic sea ice over the last 30 or so years. The sea ice in the Arctic has been getting steadily thinner over the last 30 years, and that trend is continuing. Is this an increase in the value of US businesses? No, it's not. This is the increase in mean sea level in millimeters, and as you can see, it's accelerating over that period of time. Was this an increase in sexually transmitted diseases? No. It's a change in the hurricane intensity, the amount of energy put out by hurricanes compared with that of sea surface temperatures. Both are on the increase. Do you see an decrease in traffic fatalities? Well, no, this wasn't that. That was the change in the pH of the ocean. This is the steady acidification of the ocean over the last 30 years, as more carbon dioxide is absorbed into the oceans. Do you see a correlation between murders by hot objects and the age of Miss America? Well, this actually is correct. This is exactly what this is. Correlations do not imply causation. This is something that's often used in the scientific debate about global warming, that there's a correlation between this and that therefore that proves that global warming isn't happening, or it is happening. Both of those things are wrong. A lack of correlation shows that a particular factor is not the main driver of climate change, but a correlation does not necessarily mean that there is a causation, that one effect is causing the other, and that should be remembered in all of this. What can we conclude from all of this? One is that we all have biases and they affect what we see and what we believe. However, in the case of global warming, when you remove those biases by giving the data to some experts in analysis in a double-blind test, they tend to agree with the conclusions drawn by the climatology community, i.e. that global warming is right, as you might expect. And those that are denying global warming are in fact biased in some way, either politically or financially. Until next time, goodbye.